To understand the magnitude of the shock, one must first understand the profound ordinariness of Roberts' life before the protocol. For 15 years, was a fixture of Oak Creek High, a man characterized by his punctuality and his penchant for elbow-patched blazers. He lived in a ranch-style house with a peeling mailbox and a golden retriever named Buster. To his colleagues, he was the guy who never complained about the broken photocopier. To his neighbors, he was the silent gardener who mowed his lawn with mathematical precision every Saturday. Reporters who flooded this town in the early days found a community in collective denial. He was just, his neighbor told us, echoing a sentiment felt by thousands. But behind that beige exterior was a mind operating on a frequency few could comprehend. While the world saw a man grading essays on the Industrial Revolution, was actually identifying the systemic failures of that very revolution. He spent his nights in a garage illuminated by the hum of 3 overclocked servers and the glow of a soldering iron, fueled by microwave burritos and a singular, burning question. Why do our systems fail the people they were designed to serve? This contrast between the man who forgot to take out his trash and the man who was building a digital guillotine for the financial elite is the first great mystery of this saga. It highlights a terrifying and inspiring truth, that the greatest shifts in human history often begin not in boardrooms, but in the quiet, overlooked corners of suburbia, nurtured by people we have long since stopped noticing. The first tremors of the coming earthquake were felt not in the streets, but in the sterile, high-walled forums of elite academia. 3 years ago, a series of white papers began to circulate under the pseudonym The Archivist. These weren't your typical dry, theoretical exercises. They were surgical strikes against modern economic theory. Using a blend of historical data and advanced game theory, these papers proposed a radical, decentralized resource management framework. At first, the giants of and the London School of Economics dismissed them as sophisticated pranks. However, as the math was, the tone changed from derision to desperation. I remember interviewing a Nobel laureate who admitted that reading the papers felt like watching a master chess player move pieces you didn't even know were on the board. The world's mind scrambled to unmask the author, assuming it was a rogue think tank or a state-sponsored collective of geniuses. The irony is staggering. While global task forces were being formed to find this archivist, the actual author was in a suburban high school, explaining the Monroe Doctrine to a room full of bored teenagers, was operating with a level of intellectual humility that the world simply wasn't prepared for. He wasn't seeking tenure or a book deal. He was conducting a massive, silent experiment in public service. He used the anonymity of the internet to bypass the gatekeepers of academia, ensuring his ideas were judged on their merit rather than his credentials. It was the ultimate long game, played by a man who understood that to truly change the world, you first have to let go of your ego. The turning point came with the release of what we now know as the Roberts Protocol. This wasn't just a paper. It was an active piece of open-source software that served as a digital skeleton key, had discovered a series of dormant, archaic corporate tax loopholes and dark pools of capital that had been sitting untouched for decades due to bureaucratic oversight. His protocol didn't steal money in the traditional sense. Instead, it automated the redirection of these stagnant funds into microgrants for struggling community projects, schools, and small-scale infrastructure. It was a masterpiece of ethical hacking. When the code was activated, it functioned like a biological heart, pumping dormant financial blood back into the extremities of the global body. As a reporter, I remember the night the first reports came in. A community garden in Detroit suddenly received a $50,000 anonymous grant. A rural clinic in Appalachia had its debt wiped clean by an untraceable algorithm. The scale was breathtaking. It was a redistribution of wealth that bypasses the traditional filters of government and banking, executed with a level of precision that prevented market collapse while ensuring maximum local impact. Had managed to do what centuries of protests and policy debates had failed to achieve. He created a system that prioritized human need over institutional greed, and he did it without firing a single shot. He became, in an instant, a digital Robin Hood, a man who used lines of code instead of arrows to take from the hoarders and give to the builders. The moment of exposure was as dramatic as any Hollywood thriller. An investigative team from a leading tech journal managed to trace a metadata signature from the protocol back to a specific IP address in Oak Creek. The trail led directly to the faculty lounge of Oak Creek High School. I was among the first wave of journalists to arrive on the scene that Tuesday. The contrast was jarring. One moment, it was a quiet school day. The next, the front lawn was a chaotic forest of satellite trucks and boom mics. When the final bell rang at 2:15 p.m., we all held our breath. Then the doors opened, and out walked Roberts. He looked exactly like what he was, a middle-aged history teacher who had just finished a long day of work. He was carrying a stack of ungraded quizzes and a weathered leather briefcase. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the hundreds of cameras pointed at him. He didn't run, and he didn't hide. He stood there, blinking in the sunlight, looking more confused than a man who had just disrupted the global economy had any right to be. His first words to us were etched into the public consciousness forever. I just wanted to help my students understand why the world works the way it does. I didn't realize the world was listening. It was a moment of profound vulnerability that humanized the Archivist overnight. He wasn't a shadowy hacker or a political extremist. He was a man who cared about his students. That single image, a man in a sweater vest facing down the global media, became the defining symbol of the reluctant revolutionary. The immediate aftermath of unmasking was a study in global polarization. In the skyscrapers of Manhattan and London, there was pure, unadulterated panic. Hedge fund managers and central bankers held emergency sessions, terrified that the protocol would trigger a total collapse of the traditional financial architecture. They labeled a financial terrorist and a threat to global stability. But on the ground, the narrative was the polar opposite. In the flyover states and the developing nations of the global south, was being hailed as a secular saint. We traveled to regions where the protocol had already begun to take effect. We saw families who were able to keep their homes because of a micro-grant they didn't even have to apply for. We saw small businesses flourishing in areas that had been redlined by banks for generations. The Roberts effect was real, and it was transformative. This period was a high-stakes tug-of-war for the soul of the movement. While lobbyists were screaming for his arrest, the public was forming human chains around his modest home to protect him. It was a rare moment in history where the power of an idea outpaced the power of the law. His crime was simply making the system work for the many instead of the few, and the world was divided on whether to throw him in prison or build him a statue. As a journalist, covering this divide felt like reporting from the front lines of a revolution, where the only weapon was a better way of doing things. As the initial shock wore off, the machinery of the powerful began its counterattack. His life was placed under a microscopic lens. Every tax return, every social media post, and every past relationship was scrutinized by teams of private investigators hired by firms that had lost millions to the protocol's automated grants. There were attempts to paint him as a radical extremist, a plant for a foreign government, or a mentally unstable loner. I recall the leaked documents that claimed his academic credentials were fraudulent, claims that were debunked within hours by the very university that had issued his degree. Through all of this, remained remarkably composed. He didn't hire a PR firm or a high-powered legal team. He continued to live in his house, walk his dog, and, most shockingly, he continued to go to work. The sight of a man who was essentially the most powerful economist on the planet still teaching 11th grade history was an act of defiance in itself. He refused to play the game of celebrity. He turned down millions in consulting fees and stayed focused on his syllabus. This refusal to be bought or intimidated drove his detractors crazy. It also his status as a folk hero. By remaining just a teacher, he proved that his protocol wasn't about personal gain. It was about the principles of fairness and transparency. He was the first revolutionary of the digital age who didn't want to lead the people. He just wanted to give them the tools to lead themselves. The climax of the legal battle was summons to testify before a special joint session of Congress. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a cultural event. Over 100 million people tuned in to watch the history teacher face the most powerful politicians in the country. The room was tense, filled with senators who were clearly coached by banking lobbyists to tear apart. But something incredible happened. Instead of getting defensive or using technical jargon, treated the committee like a classroom. He used a whiteboard. He told stories. He used the analogy of a school cafeteria where a few kids were hoarding all the milk, even the milk that was about to expire, while others went thirsty. "I didn't steal the milk," he said calmly. "I just fixed the distribution system so the milk wouldn't go to waste." His plain-spoken wisdom stripped the complexity away from the financial arguments, exposing the underlying greed of his critics. By the end of the first day, the tone of the hearing had shifted from an interrogation to senators who had started the day calling for his head were now asking him for advice on how to fix their own state budgets, had successfully reframed the entire conversation from legality to morality. He proved that you don't need a D in economics to understand when a system is broken. You just need the courage to point it out. It was a stunning victory for the common man, televised in high definition to a global audience. A year after the protocol went live, the Nobel Committee made the unprecedented decision to award Roberts the Peace Prize. It was a controversial choice, but a necessary one. They recognized that had achieved more for global stability through his code than decades of traditional diplomacy had. I traveled to Oslo to cover the ceremony, and the atmosphere was electric. Usually, Nobel laureates give grand, sweeping speeches about the future of humanity. True to form, gave a speech about the importance of a good teacher. He spoke about the curiosity of children and the responsibility of adults to foster a world where that curiosity isn't crushed by poverty or systemic inequality. "I am just a teacher who followed a question to its natural conclusion," he told the elite crowd. The speech was a reminder that the Roberts Protocol was merely a symptom of a much larger philosophy, that education is the ultimate disruptor. While the world celebrated his economic genius, was focused on the intellectual empowerment of the next generation. The protocol had become the new standard for international development, and poverty rates were plummeting in pilot regions. But the real victory wasn't in the data points. It was in the fact that people were finally starting to ask their own questions. He had broken the spell of the status, and the world was finally waking up to the idea that things didn't have to be the way they'd always been. Following his Nobel win did the most thing possible. He retired from public life. He didn't join a corporate board or run for office. Instead, he returned to Oak Creek, but not as a teacher in the traditional sense. He used his small portion of the Nobel Prize money to start the Roberts Foundation for Systems Thinking. The goal was simple: to teach children from a young age how to see the invisible threads that connect economics, history, and technology. He wanted to create a generation of archivists who could identify and fix systemic failures before they became crises. I visited the Foundation's first pilot school last year, and it was unlike anything I've ever seen. Children as young as 10 were discussing the ethical implications of AI and the flow of global resources, not as abstract concepts, but as practical problems they could solve. Had realized that the protocol was just a patch. The real fix for the world was a fundamental shift in how we think. He spent his days in the classroom, finally free from the burden of secrecy, doing what he loved most. The reluctant revolutionary had found his peace, not by escaping the world he had changed, but by ensuring that the change would be permanent. He had moved from being a player in the game to the person who was teaching the next generation how to redesign the board. In our final interview, conducted on a quiet park bench in Oak Creek, I asked how he wanted to be remembered. By this point, he was a fixture in history books, the man who had bridged the gap between the 1% and the 99% without a revolution. He looked at me, his eyes twinkling behind his signature spectacles, and gave a small, humble shrug. "I'm just a guy who did his homework," he said. As we sat there, a young student walked by, stopped, and looked at him with wide-eyed awe. The student asked, "Are you the man who changed everything?" Response was the perfect coda to his journey. He told the boy, "No, I'm just the man who showed everyone else that they could change it too." As a reporter who has covered wars, elections, and disasters, I've seen many people try to seize power. But Roberts was the first person I've ever met who was powerful because he chose to give it all away. He didn't just change the global economy. He changed our understanding of what a single citizen is capable of. As the sun set over the town he refused to leave, it was clear that Roberts hadn't just shocked the world, he had healed it. And in the end, he remained exactly who he started as: a teacher, a neighbor, and a man who simply knew how to listen to the silence between the numbers. This has been Sarah Vance for Global Insight.